So I'm going to share with you a four-part accessible design strategy. So my name is Alistair Duggin. I am Head of Accessibility at Government Digital Service. I've been Head of Accessibility for about 3 years now. I'm currently on shared parental leave, so I'm back in my role in January. Before working at gov.uk, I was a developer at the BBC for about 11 years. And I also worked at places like the Money Advice Service and worked on a government service called PensionWise. Is everybody familiar with gov.uk? Mostly. So gov.uk is the central government website that all government departments use to publish their content. It's also the home of all transactional services. So I think there's something like about 800 transactional services. So if you need to get a permit, if you need to get a benefit, if you need to register for something, gov.uk is where you go to do that. What's interesting about gov.uk is there's lots of people around the country, lots of different teams that are contributing to it. So this is quite interesting from an accessibility point of view, because you kind of get to see how people approach things and the mistakes that they might be making. It's also interesting for GDS because we need to figure out how to best support people, not only to make things accessible, but to create good services. So we create a number of tools and resources to help people. Are people familiar with the service manual? Yeah. So this is, woo, yeah, that's the first time that's happened. So this is basically a best practice guide for how to create a good digital service. Helping teams across government kind of know what good looks like and actually try to implement and make good services. So following agile principles, working in multidisciplinary teams, focusing on user needs and doing user research. We also have something called the gov.uk design system. So rather than just providing guidance for how to do things, the design system is basically styles, components and patterns to help. So rather than people having to recreate the wheel and figure out how to do things, kind of we try to help collaborate on what good looks like and then publish and share them so that people can reuse patterns, make sure that things look like gov.uk, but rather than figuring out kind of how things should look and how things need to work, and focus on the real problems in their service. We've spent a lot of time trying to make this accessible, thanks to a number of people over there. Some other things that we do within GDS is we try to share as much accessibility information as possible. So we have our blog where we try to kind of share best practice. And we've also had this challenge of, so if we've got lots and lots of teams around government, how do we support them? How do we build capability? So we've kind of created a cross-government accessibility community. It's essentially a Google group, but we have about 900 people that are members of that group. And it's a great place for people to ask questions, for people to kind of network and find other people that may have already done something that people are trying to do or are struggling with. We also run cross-government accessibility meetups where we try to get people to share kind of the things that they're doing. And that's actually what inspired me to get involved with the London Accessibility Meetup. I was helping government to share stuff. It kind of seemed a shame that we were only talking inside government rather than kind of sharing all this accessibility best practice across the public and private sector and third sector. So that's a little bit of background about myself and kind of GDS. What I want to talk about in this talk, I'm going to talk first a little bit about what accessibility is, just so that we're all on the same page. Then going to talk about how do you know what to consider, and then we're going to kind of look at this four-part strategy. The reason for talking about this 4-part strategy is, as a developer, I always saw the focus for accessibility was about making things kind of compatible with assistive technologies or following the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and there's actually much more to think about when you approach accessibility. To make something truly accessible, it's a team effort from the whole team, and you need to think about stuff as you're going along rather than just trying to make it compatible with an assistive technology at the end. So let's quickly chat about what accessibility is. So the first blog post that I wrote on the accessibility blog was what we mean when we talk about accessibility. And the reason for this was that I was finding it was sometimes really difficult to have productive conversations because everybody has their own meaning to what accessibility is. If you speak to a content person, or if you speak to a designer, or if you speak to a developer, or if you speak to an accessibility a professional or a product manager, they will all think accessibility is a different thing. For me, the key point about accessibility is that it's actually really easy to accidentally introduce barriers that make it impossible or difficult for somebody to use your digital product or service. What we far too often tend to do is we design for the fictional average user. So we kind of presume that people have good vision, that they have full hearing, that people have good dexterity and use a mouse or a touchscreen, and that they're good at reading and writing and have a good memory. But the fact is that humans vary hugely, and accessibility is about designing for the full range of human capability. So I'm going to throw just a few stats at you just to bring to life how diverse we are. So in the UK, 2 million people have significant sight loss, 360,000 people are blind or partially sighted, and 8% of men are colourblind. So this definitely means that people using your digital products or services, there will be people that have low vision and need to increase the text size in the browser so that they can read what's on the screen. There will be some people that need to change the colour settings. This is actually a picture of Arian. So you can see Arian changes the black text to blue and the background to cream. There are lots of different reasons why people may need to do this, and I'll chat about that a tiny bit more. Some people may have low vision and need to use a screen magnifier to make things much bigger, and they may need to change the colour contrast so that things are more legible. You will have some people that are blind that are using text-to-speech software to interact with your product, and there'll be some colourblind people that can't distinguish colours, and therefore if you're relying purely on colour to communicate, they will be excluded from that content. If we look at hearing, there are 12 million people in the UK with some kind of hearing loss and 900,000 people that are severely or profoundly deaf. So again, this does mean that there will be some of your users will be hard of hearing and will struggle to hear audio, so may require captions to get access to any audio content. And people that use sign language as their first language and therefore may find it hard to read and write English. Looking at motor control, there are 10 million people in the UK that have arthritis, 145,000 people that have Parkinson's. So there will be people that have mild motor impairments that will struggle to use a mouse and may struggle to use an interface where links and things are really small and close together. There'll be lots of people that have to use a keyboard instead of a mouse, perhaps have to use a virtual keyboard. There'll be people that have a motor impairment and can't use a mouse or a keyboard and need to use speech recognition software. Looking at cognitive, so 6.4 million people in the UK have dyslexia, so that's 10% of the population. 1.5 million people have a learning disability, and 700,000 people are on the autistic spectrum. So again, you will absolutely have people with dyslexia that will struggle to process written text and to spell. You'll have people that may find it hard to concentrate, that find it hard to struggle or process information. The other thing to call out is that it's not always helpful to think about conditions and single impairments. Lots of people have more than one impairment. These are some stats taken from a talk that Christine gave from Open Inclusion in April. So the video's up there, you can go and watch that. She brought out this point that only 34% of people with an impairment have only one, and more than 40% have 3 or more impairments. So when thinking about accessibility and conditions, it's more common for people to have multiple than to have just one. The other thing that we need to get better at doing is we tend to think about impairments or disabilities as somebody either being disabled or not, but the fact is that impairments and disability is a spectrum. This is taken from a survey that Microsoft did in 2003. The percentages aren't that important, but the concept that some of your users will not struggle, some people will have minimal difficulties, some will have mild difficulties, and some have severe difficulties in using your product is a really important thing to consider, and how you approach making something accessible can or should be influenced by thinking in this way. The other thing, has everybody seen the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit? So the other thing to think about with accessibility and impairments is that anything that you do for somebody with a permanent disability will benefit somebody that has a temporary or a situational. And temporary and situational impairments happen to us all. So therefore, you can argue that by making things accessible, you're actually benefiting everyone. So I've kind of said, like, thinking about conditions and thinking about impairments isn't necessarily the best way to think about it. A much better way of thinking about it is our goal is to make digital products that work without vision, with limited vision, without perception of colour, without hearing, with limited hearing, with limited dexterity, with limited cognition, and without speech. That sounds like quite a task, but it's absolutely doable if you approach accessibility in the right way. So then the question becomes, so how do you actually know what to consider to make something truly accessible? And there's a few things out there that can help. Have people heard of this thing called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines? So this is essentially, it's their inclusive design guidelines that help you avoid some of the common barriers. They will not help you remove all barriers. They will not result in a truly accessible service, but they will help you avoid some of the most common barriers that people commonly put in their websites and digital services. They're based on 4 principles of being perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. I will explain what those 4 things are. Who is familiar with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines? Okay, so we've got most of the room. Who's familiar with the terms perceivable, operable, understandable, robust? Slightly less, okay. Who knows the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines really well, like knows it inside out? About 2 or 3 people. Okay, that's quite common. So essentially, it's based on 4 principles. There's a number of guidelines. Each of those guidelines has some testable success criteria. And if you pass the success criteria, that means that you have avoided some of these common barriers. I like to explain perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust in the following way. If you think about a website or a digital interface, there's a number of things that need to happen for somebody to have a successful interaction. So the first thing that needs to happen is if you have any content or the information that's being communicated through the interface, that needs to be perceived by the person that wants to use that system. So that means that content needs to be available to at least one of your senses. So if you're blind and there are images, is there a text representation that can be read out by a screen reader? If you are deaf and there's some audio, is there a text transcript that you can read instead of having to hear? The next thing that needs to happen when you have perceived that information is for you to understand it. And again, this is the words in the page, but also the interface. So I could show you a Chinese or a Polish website. You would be able to perceive that. You'd be able to perceive that information, but the chances are you wouldn't understand the information, so you wouldn't be able to complete any tasks. There are lots of reasons why you might not understand things. It could be complex language that's being used. It might be an interface that's not predictable or intuitive. The next thing that needs to happen is that you can operate the interface. So can you click the links? Can you click the buttons? Not everybody uses a mouse or a keyboard. There's lots of different ways that people might be interacting with your website, and they need to be able to successfully operate it. The last thing that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines talks about is about making sure that it's robust, and that means that it works with the technologies that you are using. So if you are using a screen reader, does it work with that screen reader? You could break it down, or simply if you're using an old browser or a new browser or a browser that's going to come out next year, is the thing that you've built going to work with those technologies? If any one of these four things breaks down, somebody cannot have a successful interaction, and they will be frustrated, potentially left out, or may have to rely on somebody else to help them complete the interaction or the journey. Who's seen the do's or don'ts accessibility posters by the Home Office? About 2/3 of the room. So these are brilliant because unlike the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are brilliant but overwhelming and technical and confusing, these posters just kind of distill some of the most important things in a really easily digestible way. These have been translated, is it into 14 languages? And kind of downloaded literally tens of thousands of times. So if you've not looked at these, there's some really good information in there. So there's one for low vision, one for screen readers, one for deaf and hard of hearing. There's another for dyslexia, for the autistic spectrum, and for physical or motor disabilities. There's also one for anxiety, and there's one for aphasia, and I think a few others might have been created by some other people as well. One of the things that is brilliant about the posters is that it gets people to think about different impairments and to see things that you should be doing to avoid them. What's kind of bad about them potentially is that people think, so I have to do all this stuff, do I have all these users? Something that I decided to do a couple of weeks ago, just before I did this presentation in Berlin, was to cut up all of the do's and don'ts and to group them into content design, visual design, interaction design, code, and service design. And if you look at them, they are just really good advice for how to design usable services. And it's a really good example about how, by thinking about differences in human capability, it actually helps you design better things. Something that we did at GDS, because we liked the posters so much, but because we saw some weaknesses, is that we created some user profiles that just help to set a little bit more context. With the posters, you don't know why you have to do this stuff, and it doesn't give you much context. So we've created some user profiles that help people get up to speed really quickly with understanding common barriers that people face and how to avoid them. One of the other ways to know what you need to do when designing something is to include people with different access needs in your user research. One quick thing to say there, though, is what is in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and what is in the posters have actually come from user research. So it's not just somebody thought, oh, let's just put these things down. This is kind of like a culmination of research findings and expertise. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be also doing user research. You absolutely should. If you're doing user research, you should just be including people with access needs as well. A common thing that we hear is that, well, we can't include somebody with an access need until we've built the thing, because we just need to include people that are screen reader users, and if it's not kind of production code, then there's no point testing it with them, because they won't be able to use it anyway. But the fact is that there's lots of different types of user research that you can do throughout your journey, and there's different types of people that you can use at different stages. So absolutely include people with access needs throughout your user research, and it will help you to highlight issues more quickly and to come up with solutions that benefit everyone. So that's a bit of context. Hopefully that was useful. Quite often people just presume, because we're at an accessibility meetup, that everybody knows everything about accessibility, so there's no point in kind of doing some of the fundamentals. So now let's look at this kind of 4-part strategy for accessible design. So the question becomes, how do we design something that meets the needs of the broadest possible audience? We did some user research probably about 18 months ago now, where we were looking at how teams across government were approaching accessibility and the challenges that they were facing. And what we found most of the time was that teams thought about accessibility just before a project was about to go live. And if this is what is happening, absolutely you will find a load of barriers that need to be fixed. And it's really demotivating for a team that thinks they're about to put something live to again find out that they've got all this stuff that they need to fix. Also, what tends to happen in that situation is that you will kind of almost do the bare minimum to fix the issues so that you can go live, rather than using accessibility as a tool that helps you design a more usable service. So much better to think about accessibility from the start and to incorporate it into all of your processes. The other thing that I want you to think about before we start this kind of 4-part strategy is that every design decision has the potential to include or exclude people. So if you use more complex language, there will be fewer people that can use your service. If you use smaller text with a lower contrast, fewer people will be able to use your service. So with that in mind, here's my top 4. So the first thing that we want to be doing is we want to be designing for most users so that they don't have to modify their experience. So something that I'd like to say is that complexity is the enemy of accessibility. If you're looking at technical accessibility, like if you come up with a slider or a drag and drop interface, you can absolutely make that technically accessible, but lots of people just will not be able to use it. So much better to keep things simple and to help people kind of do what they're trying to do. So this leads into this next thing of focusing on what users need and trying to provide a good user experience for them. I think this is what Gov.uk has been particularly good at, kind of calling out this need or this process of kind of focusing on user needs and keeping things as simple as possible. So I've cut out a few of the do's and don'ts just to reinforce some of the stuff that I'm going to say. So if we first think about some of the content, so we want to be writing content that uses plain language and is as clear and easy to understand as possible. And that just kind of reiterates kind of what the first talk was all about. If you look at the posters, yeah, it talks about using plain language, avoid using figures of speech and those sorts of things, because some people just will have no idea what you're talking about and may not be able to complete what they're trying to do. Then there's really simple things like breaking content up so that it's got descriptive headings and lists. This makes such a difference for people that struggle to read or to process information. It also just makes it much easier for everybody. People don't sit and read everything, they will scan a page. Like, this kind of structure just helps people digest information a lot better. Then there's things like writing descriptive links, buttons and form tables, so avoiding things like click here links or kind of click here buttons. People often kind of cite that this is really important for screen reader users, but it's also really important for lots of people. If somebody has got a cognitive impairment, having a call to action that makes sense is just going to make stuff much easier to use. Equally, if you're stressed or just trying to get something done, you don't want to be battling with the words in the page. You want to be able to just kind of know how to interact with that content. Another really important one is about providing error messages that actually help people correct the errors. Quite often you see kind of forms that when somebody puts something in wrong, you know something hasn't worked, but you don't know where the error is or how to fix it. One of the things I'm super excited about is the page in the service manual that provides some amazing advice about how to write error messages that actually help people correct the error and kind of, get through those problems. So that's kind of some content stuff, which I think you will probably agree just helps everybody. Then there's kind of design things like designing an interface that is simple, intuitive, and consistent. Things like making content legible with good color contrast. So here we've got from the do's and don'ts. Yeah, there's about using good color contrast, but also things like left aligning text and like justified text can be really hard for people with dyslexia to use. It's just also harder to process for people that don't have dyslexia. Providing large hit areas for buttons and controls. Again, like gov.uk did some really hard work to make our radio buttons and our click boxes much more usable by making them a lot bigger. Huge benefits for people with mobility issues, huge benefits for anybody that wants to use that interface. And then there's other things like allowing plenty of time and putting the user in control. So giving users enough time to complete an action and to let users check their answers before they submit them. So would you agree that they are things that will kind of benefit everybody? Nothing controversial there. Cool. So then the next thing is to realize that even though this is brilliant for most of your users, there will be some users that will still struggle with what you've done, and they may need to customize or to adapt the interface. So many people will have to adapt the experience. Who increases the font size on their phone? So we've got at least 20 people in the room. So this on the iPhone, this is tucked away in the accessibility settings. I'm always surprised, not that I look over people's shoulders when they're using their phones, but I'm always surprised how many people do this. And it just, especially when you're on a mobile device, having the text a bit bigger benefits lots of people. One of the biggest kind of accessibility barriers that people with low vision they encounter when using mobile apps is that the interface doesn't respond to the larger text. Or you can get a larger phone. This is also the same for websites. Like lots of people will increase the text size. If you've built your website responsively, the text becomes bigger. You don't have to scroll as much. This has actually become one of the requirements of WCAG 2.1, that the interface is responsive. So as well as wanting to change how big things are, some people will want to change how it looks. So this is in Firefox, the browser. You can change the color of text, you can change the color of the background, you can change the color of links. This can be hugely helpful for people that have dyslexia that may find it easier to read off a cream background rather than a white background. May be really helpful for somebody with a visual impairment that needs higher contrast or needs lower contrast. Where's Annika? I know she's here. Annika wrote this. So Annika is one of the developers on the accessibility team at GDS, and she did a brilliant piece of work looking at gov.uk elements, which was kind of what became before the design system. And she went through all of the components in gov.uk elements and tested how they reacted when you changed the appearance, either in the browser or on the operating system. And she found some stuff like, so this is what a normal form field looks like when it's displayed as it was designed to be displayed. This is what was happening when somebody was changing the colours, that the button no longer looks like a button, and when you type text into the input field, it actually disappears. So you can see it if you highlight it, but it's not there if you don't. So Annika went through and kind of did some relatively simple fixes, but make a huge impact for people that are using the interface under these sorts of circumstances. So Nick Colley, who's sit over there, he's done some more incredible work in the gov.uk design system. And we've actually, in the gov.uk front end, we've got this thing about we aim to support users who adjust or override the colours of websites they visit. We test this by changing colours in Firefox, enabling high contrast mode in Windows, and using high contrast using the high contrast plugin for Chrome. So for lots of these barriers, if you're not looking for them, you won't know if they're there. And a few simple checks can just help you be a lot more confident that you've kind of not accidentally introduced some barriers. Captions are really important for people that have a hearing impairment. They can be an absolute nightmare for somebody that's on the autistic spectrum or has ADHD. So giving people the option to turn on or off captions is really important. If you look at what the BBC iPlayer does is they also let people kind of change the size of the caption. So letting people take control of the interface will mean that more people can happily use it. There's also things like if you have a time limit, allowing people to disable or to extend that time limit. One of my bugbears is when you get to a website and you see a carousel and the carousel moves so quickly that nobody has a chance of reading that. If you're not letting people stop or pause that, you are excluding quite a few people. Also things like if you've got animations or if you've got audio that auto plays, you should allow people to stop or pause that. I could go on. That's not everything, but they're kind of the main kind of things to be thinking about. So the next thing to think about is there will be some bits of your design or your functionality that absolutely will not work for some people. And so that you don't exclude them, you need to provide a complementary alternative that provides the same functionality, but that they can use it. So this is about identifying designs that exclude people and providing an alternative. So the example that I like to give is interactive maps. Who here finds interactive maps like Google Maps really helpful? So we've got most of the room. If you don't have vision, or if you have a mobility impairment and can't drag the interface, you will be completely excluded from that interface. That doesn't mean that you can't use an interactive map, because it is really helpful for lots of people. But you need to figure out what functionality is this providing, and how do I allow somebody that can't see it and can't drag it, how can they still get that functionality? So if we look at this is basically from a service that allows people to look for flood warnings at a location. So how could you provide an alternative? Well, just providing a text box where somebody can put a location and then providing that same information that's in the map in text form allows somebody to get that information. This is brilliant not just for accessibility reasons, but I can guarantee you there'll be lots of users that don't know you can drag that or don't know how to zoom into it. So you're actually just making a more flexible, more accommodating design that will work for more people. This is an example from the Renew Your Passport service. We've got a few people in the room, a few representatives. So if you were to look at this page and if you checked it against the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, if you looked at the content, if you looked at the design, if you looked at the code, it's really good. But there's a barrier here that prevents some people with impairments from being able to use it. I won't ask, I'll just go in. So I was fortunate enough to see some user research that was being done on this service with some users that were deaf, and one of the users that got to this page, she said, I always find that very, very, very annoying with online forms. They never give me the opportunity to say text only. So how do I let people know that I don't want you to phone me? So a deaf user may well have a phone. So it's not about, I don't want to give you my phone number, it's about, I want you to know how I want you to communicate with me. So the team, it was quite easy for the team to create an interface that allowed somebody to kind of say how they wanted that information. So this is just providing an alternative way to receive messages. Really important. Something that I worked on not that long ago was a government consultation on the implementation of a new EU directive where all public sector websites will need to meet the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We worked really hard to make it as accessible as possible, so we worked with the content designer to make the content more readable. We made sure that the online survey met the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but we kind of stepped back and said, are there some people that will definitely want to use this that will be excluded from it? And absolutely, people that use BSL and have English as a second language will want to access that content in their first language so that they know what this is about. And equally, people with a learning disability, even though the content had been simplified with the help of a content designer, providing easy read would ensure that people with learning disabilities would be able to access that content. So again, it's just looking at a thing, thinking who is going to be excluded, and then coming up with a complementary alternative so that they're not excluded. So then the fourth thing is about designing with a view to connect seamlessly with assistive technologies. Lots of people treat this as what accessibility is, but if you've not done the other thing, you are only helping a few people, and you may have the least usable thing in the world, and yes, you've made it work with an assistive technology, but you could have just done much better and made it more simple and more usable. So we did a survey a couple of years ago now to look at what assistive technologies people were using when they came to gov.uk. So assistive technologies don't leave a footprint in your server log. So you know what browsers people are using, but you have no idea what assistive technologies are using. So we wrote a survey and we asked people to tell them what assistive tech and what browsers they were using. We found that for those that were using assistive tech, the most popular were screen magnifiers at 30%, screen readers at 29%, speech recognition software at 18%, and then readability software at 15%. And off the back of that, we came up with a short and pragmatic list of assistive tech, saying if you test with these assistive technology, yes, it's not all assistive tech, but if you test with these assistive tech with these browser combinations, you will have a good level of confidence that you've made it compatible with assistive tech. So what are some of the things that you need to consider to make sure that things work with assistive technology? So there's things like ensuring your content is in a logical order. It's really easy to write code so that a design looks a certain way but the underlying content is not in the same order as it visually looks. So if something like text-to-speech software reads that content out, it will read things out in the wrong order, so it will make no sense to a user. So really important to make sure that your content is in a logical order. Use the most appropriate HTML. There's a really good presentation by Carl Groves called "What is this thing and what does it do?" It's basically, if you're looking at an interface, if you've got a button, like somebody needs to know it's a button because they know what they can do with it and they know what will happen if they click it. If your code doesn't say this is a button, people using assistive technology will not be able to interact with the interface. And that works for all kinds of content and all kinds of interactive components. One of the other big things to think about is if you're hiding content, make sure you're doing it in such a way that it doesn't cause problems with assistive tech. If you write this wrong CSS to hide something, that may mean that content is not available to a screen reader, or there might be content that shouldn't be available to that screen reader, and it is. So developers need to be careful there. Ensuring all content and functionality is available to a keyboard. If I'm testing a site for accessibility, the first thing I will do is see if it works with a keyboard. If it doesn't work with a keyboard, you know somebody has not considered accessibility. Here's a short video of a service that had this problem. It doesn't have it anymore. But you can see, as a mouse user, I can hover over this link, and this content appears that helps you know what content you need to put in this form field. Unfortunately, the way that the developer had implemented it, if you're using a keyboard and you tab through the interface, you can get through the form fields, which is the expected behavior, but when you get to that link, that content doesn't appear. So a content designer may have done an incredible job of doing the content. A designer may have made the interface really kind of easy to use, and a developer may have accidentally excluded keyboard users or assistive technology users due to how they've implemented it. The other thing that we want to try to do is to provide a comparable experience. So if you've got something like, if you think of something like you've got a preloader on a page, for somebody that can see that page, what your preloader is doing is telling somebody that you need to wait because something is happening. An assistive technology or a screen reader user also wants the information. So it's just thinking about what is this experience that I'm providing? Is it being provided to everybody? Some of the ways that we kind of tackle this at GDS is we write things called acceptance criteria. So I'm going to give you an example of some acceptance criteria that we write for one of our components, which is a character count. So for people, just to help you know what a character count is. So sometimes when you are inputting text into a text box, there can be some text at the bottom that updates that says you've got a word limit of 200. You've only got 20 characters left. There's a load of things that you need to do to make sure that this works with assistive technology. So these are things like making sure that it's focusable with a keyboard, making sure that the user is informed about the character limit, and making sure that the user that you inform the user as the number of the characters change. It's really helpful to think about this stuff up front and capture it, because that will save you a huge amount of time compared to designing and building something, then getting it tested, and then somebody saying, this is the stuff that it needs to have done. If you get people thinking about this before it's designed and built, you will save a huge amount of time. Some of the other things that we do is run automated accessibility testing tools. Automating testing tools aren't very good at telling you if something is truly accessible, but they're really good at finding some of the common code problems that mean your code won't be compatible with assistive tech. We also make sure that we test with a keyboard. And so something that you can do that's really helpful is lots of browsers now have accessibility inspectors, so you can inspect the thing, and you can see what information is being made available to assistive technologies. And this can help you spot problems even before you test it within within something like a screen reader. So for this box, you can see that it does have a name that will be exposed to the screen reader, and that the descriptive text is going to be read out by a screen reader as well. So we've actually built an assistive technology test bench at Government Digital Service. This is just to help teams easily access stuff so that they can test stuff. Really important thing, another great blog by Annika was about there's lots of free assistive technologies that are already available on your computers that you can use for free. So if you don't have the money to invest in an assistive technology test bench, you can still fire up a screen reader and those sorts of things. We've provided some guidance to help people start their journey with how to test things. And one of the things that we're really clear about is if you do find a problem, is sometimes it's really good to get advice on how to fix it. It might be that the problem that you found is due to you don't know how to use the assistive technology rather than it being a problem with what has been created. Something that we got asked in the Google group lots by content people was, we've got this text that's being read out incorrectly. How do we make sure that it's read out correctly? And our advice was, follow best practice for writing text because you can't predict how a screen reader or how a user will be using that assistive technology. But as well as doing all this stuff like testing on devices, we also make sure that we include people with access needs in the research that we do. And if you want to know more information about that, there was a brilliant talk about how the design system team have been kind of designing and testing components in the design system. So a few closing thoughts. Sorry, I realise I've been running over a little bit, nearly there, sorry. So just to reiterate, our goal is not about being WCAG compliant. Our goal is not about making sure that something works with assistive technologies. Our goal is to make something truly accessible that can literally be used by the widest possible audience. If you're only concentrating on those two things, there's a high chance that you will still be introducing barriers. So for simplicity, if you think about, is this thing easy to use? Can people adapt the experience if they need to? Have I provided a complementary alternative if it's required? And does it work with an assistive tech? That will help you make a truly accessible product. And not just an accessible product, but a usable product that will benefit everybody. Last thing is about how disabilities and impairments become more common with age. So 8% of children have a disability. This rises to 19% for the working population and is 45% for people that are 65 or over. So designing with accessibility in mind is about designing for your friends, your families, and your future selves. If you're not making stuff accessible, it's friends and families and yourselves in the not too distant future that may find it really hard to use. Thank you very much.